Imagine a mortal, one man with unmatched skill, stepping into a universe where aliens, daemons, and unstoppable war machines rule. What happens when John Wick, trained to kill, fearless, unstoppable, faces the horrors of Warhammer 40K? Every shadow could be death. Every corner hides an enemy, and survival is far from guaranteed. Are you ready to witness the impossible? The moment John Wick materialized in the heart of the Hive City, the atmosphere seemed to shiver with a tension that even the rotting walls of the lower levels could not conceal. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid tang of burning fuel, mixed with the stench of death and decay that had been accumulating for decades. His eyes adjusted to the dim flicker of failing lights, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to take in the chaos around him. Towering buildings, some partially collapsed, loomed like skeletal remains of forgotten gods, their surfaces pocked with scorch marks and the remnants of past battles. The streets were clogged with debris, twisted metal, and the lifeless forms of unfortunate citizens caught in the crossfire between rival gangs, cultists, and enforcers who had long since abandoned the idea of order. Somewhere above, a distant siren wailed, shrill and mournful. He moved silently, stepping over the cracked pavement and rubble, his boots making almost no sound against the wet rime. There was a precision in his movements, a measured awareness that seemed almost instinctual, honed over countless nights of survival and violence. Even here, in this alien and hostile environment, that skill remained unbroken. As he navigated the maze of alleys and partially destroyed streets, Wick could hear the faint murmur of voices ahead, a guttural chanting that seemed almost alive, vibrating with malice. His instincts told him these were no ordinary gangsters or petty thieves. The cadence and rhythm of their speech suggested something older, something corrupted by dark energies far beyond anything he had encountered before. The air around them shimmered slightly, as though reality itself recoiled from their presence. Wick's eyes narrowed. He observed the cultists from a distance first, noting the way they moved, their gestures, and the patterns in their ritualistic dance. They wore tattered robes, stitched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when looked at directly, as if infused with a life of their own. Some carried crude weapons, bladed staffs and rusted pistols, but others had nothing visible in their hands, only shadows melting into darkness, their power manifesting through sheer will and the dark energy that pulsed around them. He didn't hesitate. Training and instinct merged seamlessly. Wick knew when to assess, when to strike, and when to simply move undetected. He found cover in the wreckage of an old transport vehicle, scanning the scene with precise calculation, noting entry and exit points, the rhythm of their movements, the position of each cultist relative to the others. A sudden flicker of movement caught his attention, a shadow that should not have existed. One of the cultists seemed taller, broader, the outline distorted, almost inhuman. Its voice rose above the others, commanding in a tone that vibrated unnaturally. The chanting grew louder, more frenetic, and the shadows seemed to stretch and crawl along the walls toward Wick's position. He knew instinctively that this confrontation would not be conventional. There would be no simple shootouts, no predictable assaults. This was a game of survival, where every instinct, every honed skill, every ounce of experience would be tested to the limits. He took a shallow breath, allowing his body to relax, while every muscle stayed coiled, ready. From his vantage point, Wick began a careful, methodical approach, moving along the rubble-strewn street, sticking to shadows, using the environment as his ally. Broken scaffolding, fallen signs, overturned carts, all became tools in his arsenal of improvisation. When the cultists' attention snapped briefly toward a distant scream, he seized the moment, advancing silently and positioning himself for maximum advantage. The hum of unseen machinery and the distant roar of collapsing buildings created a chaotic symphony. But Wick's focus remained razor-sharp, isolating threats and potential avenues for escape. A sudden hiss drew his attention. One cultist had detected a shadow moving unnaturally fast. Before they could react, Wick struck with brutal efficiency. In a blur of motion, he disarmed the nearest threat, sending a jagged blade spinning across the floor and delivering a precise, incapacitating strike. The other cultists froze, the chanting faltering for just a moment as disbelief flickered across their faces. That moment was all he needed to continue, moving from cover to cover, neutralizing threats with mechanical precision. His movements fluid, almost elegant despite the ferocity of his attacks. The cultists, caught off guard by his skill and speed, began to scatter, retreating into the deeper, darker levels of the hive. Even in the chaos, Wick's mind worked rapidly, cataloging potential allies and enemies alike. The city was alive with danger at every corner. Fires crackled in the distance, and the sound of collapsing infrastructure echoed through the cavernous streets. He could sense that these cultists were just the beginning, a scouting force perhaps, and that whatever summoned him here had far greater ambitions. Yet he felt no hesitation, no fear. Every movement, every decision carried the weight of someone who had faced impossible odds countless times and survived. As he pressed forward, he realized that in this city of shadows and whispers, of decay and corruption, he would not merely survive. He would leave a mark, a legacy written in blood and precision, moving silently and deadly through the darkness. Unstoppable, a force of vengeance made flesh. The chanting of the cultists faded into echoes, but the sense of being watched never left him. Shadows seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally around the corners of his vision, and the distant hum of machinery and the growl of unseen beasts reminded him constantly that this world operated by rules far different from his own. Wick adapted quickly, assessing every threat, calculating risks, and moving with a grace and lethality that was almost supernatural. The city, despite its alien architecture and oppressive atmosphere, became a hunting ground perfectly suited to his skills. Every alley, every rooftop, every shadow was a part of his strategy. He was no longer just a man. He had become a singular instrument of precision, a deadly force in a world teeming with threats beyond comprehension, yet none that could break his focus or resolve. Wick pressed further into the hive, a silent storm in a world of chaos. Unseen, yet utterly lethal. His presence already beginning to reshape the course of events in ways the cultists could never have imagined. As John Wick moved deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the Hive City, a strange whirring and clanking began to echo through the corridors. It was subtle at first, almost drowned out by the distant groans of collapsing buildings and the chaotic chatter of fleeing cultists. But it grew steadily, rhythmic and precise, as if some massive machine were methodically advancing toward him. Wick's instincts, honed through years of relentless conflict, told him immediately that this was no ordinary patrol. He pressed his back against a jagged wall of corroded metal, scanning the corridor ahead with the same precision he applied to every encounter. Ahead, figures began to emerge from the shadows. Their forms were humanoid, yet their movements were unnervingly mechanical, deliberate, almost unnatural. Red glowing ocular lenses scanned the environment, shifting independently of their heads, while segmented armor plates clanked with each step. The unmistakable sigils of the Adeptus Mechanicus adorned their shoulders and gauntlets, marks of devotion to the machine god. Wick's mind raced. He had faced armies, assassins, and mercenaries, but these were beings shaped by technology and ritual, fanatically devoted to an ideology that fused flesh and machine into something wholly alien. The leader of the unit stepped forward, taller than the rest, with intricate cybernetic augmentations spiraling across his skull and faceplate. He extended a mechanical arm, the servos whirring softly, and spoke in a voice filtered through Vox enhancers, layered and cold. Unauthorized presence detected. Identify yourself and declare purpose within the domain of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Wick's eyes scanned the figure, calculating. Any wrong movement here could trigger a violent, lethal response. Yet he remained composed, almost unnervingly calm, a predator unflinching in the face of unknown danger. He studied the positioning of the servitors behind the leader, the weapons they carried, and the likely protocols they would follow if he made the first aggressive move. Without warning, one of the servitors raised a plasma rifle, and the faint hum of charged energy filled the air. Wick's reaction was instantaneous. His body moved with fluid, preternatural efficiency, sliding behind a chunk of debris that offered minimal cover, but enough to buy him a fraction of a second. Sparks flew as a plasma bolt seared through the air where he had just been standing. He rolled forward, the motion perfectly timed, and drew two compact, modified pistols he had somehow adapted for this alien environment. The weapons felt natural in his hands, extensions of his lethal intent rather than simple tools. A measured volley of shots struck the nearest servitor, disabling joints and sensors with surgical precision, sending sparks and smoke into the dim corridor. The leader's head tilted unnaturally, analyzing Wick's movements. He is efficient, anomalous, the voice emitted. Servitors regrouped, moving in formation with uncanny synchronization. Wick adjusted his approach, noting every sensor, every possible line of fire, and began maneuvering through the environment like a shadow, with lethal intent. He understood, without needing to think, that these machines were not bound by human hesitation, yet they could be predicted. Each step, each calculated action, was designed to manipulate their rigid protocols against them, turning their technological precision into a trap for their own advantage. Wick's eyes caught a pattern in the corridor, exposed conduits and hydraulic lines that could be exploited. He fired, sending sparks and plasma flying, creating a barrier of chaos and distraction. The Mechanicus warriors faltered, momentarily disrupted by the unexpected aggression and ingenuity. Wick pressed forward, eliminating threats methodically, disabling each servitor with a combination of firearms and hand-to-hand precision strikes. His movements were a symphony of violence, graceful yet brutal, every action deliberate, every strike purposeful. The leader recalibrated, now approaching with a caution that suggested more than mere observation. Wick sensed a change in tone, an acknowledgement of skill and danger. The Adeptus Mechanicus were relentless in their pursuit of knowledge, yet they were also cautious when faced with an unknown entity of exceptional efficiency. He allowed them to close slightly, forcing them to engage on his terms. Each narrow corridor became a stage for lethal improvisation. Wick utilized the environment. Loose panels, dangling cables, shards of metal, to his advantage, redirecting energy discharges and even creating barriers between him and advancing enemies. Despite their technological enhancements, the Adeptus Mechanicus could not anticipate the adaptability and fluidity of his combat style. Wick moved like a ghost, striking from unexpected angles, using timing and precision to incapacitate rather than merely kill, forcing the enemy to react to his will. Sparks, smoke, and the acrid stench of ozone filled the corridor as weapons discharged and servitors collapsed, their systems overloaded or destroyed. The leader, now alone and assessing the ruin of his forces, extended multiple cybernetic appendages, launching precise counterattacks. Yet Wick's intuition, his honed reflexes, allowed him to dodge, weave, and counter with inhuman accuracy. In a rare moment of stillness, amidst the chaos, Wick paused, eyes scanning the devastation he had wrought. His mind processed every data point: weapon dispersal, energy output, movement patterns. He understood that these beings were formidable, fanatically loyal to the machine god, and that any misstep could result in instant death. Yet there was no fear. Every calculated move, every strike, was informed by decades of experience in facing overwhelming odds. He realized that the Adeptus Mechanicus' interest in him was not merely hostile. They were intrigued, trying to understand the anomaly that had appeared in their domain, a being whose lethality defied comprehension. The hum of machinery continued, the corridor littered with the wreckage of servitors, and the faint, flickering glow of damaged augmentics. Wick moved silently, avoiding detection when possible, neutralizing threats when necessary, his body and mind perfectly attuned to the deadly environment around him. He understood that in this city, surrounded by entities that valued precision, logic, and devotion to machine over flesh, he was an anomaly, unpredictable, adaptable, and lethal beyond measure. Each step, each breath, each movement was a negotiation with death, and so far, Wick had the advantage. The echoes of his passage through the corridors were joined by distant, mechanical footsteps. The relentless advance of Adeptus Mechanicus forces attempting to understand, control, or eliminate him. Wick's mind raced, calculating contingencies and escape routes, exploiting weaknesses and turning the technological superiority of his pursuers against them. Every encounter strengthened his understanding of this new world, its dangers and its rules, allowing him to move through it not as a victim, but as a force capable of bending circumstance to his will. A human predator amidst a sea of machines, unseen, yet utterly unstoppable. John Wick moved through the shattered streets of the Hive City, the remnants of cultist skirmishes and Mechanicus patrols behind him. His every step precise, deliberate, and aware. The air vibrated with tension, heavy with the metallic tang of blood, ozone, and smoke from collapsing structures. He had no time to pause. The city itself seemed alive, each alleyway, each fractured building, a potential ambush, a test of his reflexes and wits. From a distant junction, he heard the echoing boom of massive bolter fire and the unmistakable, disciplined thrum of power armor servos. His sharp instincts recognized the presence of space marines, the Adeptus Astartes, titans among men, and warriors of near-mythical capability. They were moving in coordinated formations, their presence asserting authority and lethal intent. Yet there was an element of curiosity in their advance, as if they sensed an unknown variable within the urban chaos, something anomalous. Wick observed them from the shadows, noting the markings on their pauldrons and the weapons they carried: bolters, chain swords, and power fists. instruments of death, magnified by the strength of superhuman conditioning. The squad moved with almost eerie precision, each step calculated, each line of fire covered by another. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Their discipline and training rivaled the best military units he had ever faced. Yet Wick did not flinch. He understood instinctively that engagement was inevitable. These were not foes in the conventional sense, but tests, and he had always excelled when stakes were highest. A space marine spotted a collapsed scaffolding piece ahead, its precarious angles offering both threat and opportunity. Wick seized the moment, stepping into the open just long enough to draw attention and study their reaction. The squad's response was instantaneous, coordinated, and brutal. Bolter fire erupted in precise bursts, sending rounds that could tear through reinforced concrete with terrifying ease. Wick dropped to the side, the rounds igniting sparks and chipping metal as he rolled to cover, his reflexes perfectly calibrated. He returned fire with a combination of his pistols and the scavenged weapons he had adapted for this world. Each shot measured, aiming for weak points in the Space Marine's armor, exploiting gaps, joints, and misalignments. The lead Marine, clad in deep cerulean armor, advanced with unwavering confidence. Every step shook the ground slightly, the weight of his armor amplified by servo-assisted movement, his presence an imposing wall of power. Wick noted the rhythm of his stride, the angle of his shoulder when aiming his bolter, the subtle tilts of his helmet that indicated scanning patterns. He understood that this was a being conditioned to survive the most extreme encounters. Yet Wick's own combat intuition, born from decades of assassination and survival, allowed him to predict responses almost before they occurred. He moved, flowing between cover and line of sight, striking with precision, each bullet finding its mark in vulnerable areas, causing the Marine to stagger, yet not falter, as if the injury was only a minor annoyance to one conditioned beyond ordinary pain. Wick's approach was not merely offensive. It was psychological, but test of adaptability and nerves. He exploited environmental hazards, the crumbling scaffolds, exposed power conduits, and fractured piping, using them to distract, injure, or temporarily disable his adversaries. A chain snapped under weight, falling across the path of a charging Marine and forcing him to leap, momentarily disrupting formation. Sparks and flames from ruptured conduits created smoke and confusion, giving Wick fleeting advantages that he capitalized on without hesitation. He was a ghost in the battlefield, invisible until lethal precision revealed itself, an anomaly that resisted comprehension, even by the Space Marine's superior cognition. One Marine, larger than the rest, wielding a chainsword, attempted to close the gap for melee combat. Wick's mind raced, analyzing speed, angle, and timing. With a subtle feint and swift pivot, He dodged the arc of the chainsword and delivered a precise strike to the Marine's knee joint with an adapted blade, disrupting movement. The larger Marine roared, a terrifying sound, amplified by the Vox enhancers within his helm. Yet he was forced to recalibrate, adapting to Wick's unpredictable style. Wick pressed the advantage, exploiting every opening, moving fluidly between offense and defense, using unconventional tactics that defied the rigid training of the Astartes, yet were undeniably effective. The squad began to recognize the pattern in his attacks. The combination of stealth, precision, and adaptability. Each Space Marine reacted with augmented perception and speed, forming overlapping fields of suppression fire, attempting to corral Wick into predictable positions. But he was never predictable. He flowed like water around their formations, finding weak points, exploiting distractions, and neutralizing threats before they could adjust. A burst from a bolter narrowly missed him, but he used the recoil to propel himself sideways, rolling across debris, and using the momentum to strike another Marine in a vulnerable section of armor, disabling him without killing outright, a testament to Wick's control and mastery. In the chaos, Wick observed the squad's dynamics. Their communication, though limited, was precise. He identified the squad leader's micro-gestures, the subtle signals that directed tactical maneuvers, and he used those cues to anticipate movements, staying one step ahead. It was a deadly dance, each participant pushing the other to their limits, testing skill, adaptability, and endurance. The fight became a silent conversation of movement and counter-movement. A contest of reflexes, strategy, and survival instincts, where one miscalculation could result in instantaneous death. Despite their overwhelming physical advantage, the Space Marines could not anticipate Wick's unconventional methods. He used the environment as a weapon, improvising traps, redirecting energy discharges, and exploiting terrain. Broken girders, flaming debris, and collapsed machinery became instruments of strategy, amplifying his human ingenuity against superhuman might. Each step, each breath, each strike was intentional, calculated, and executed with lethal precision, demonstrating a mastery that rivaled the legendary warriors before him. Even as the squad attempted to regroup, Wick's presence alone disrupted their cohesion. His lethal efficiency, adaptability, and singular focus made him not merely an intruder, but a force that reshaped the battlefield. In that ruined hive city, amidst the echo of bolter fire and the hiss of melting armor, John Wick proved himself a predator beyond ordinary comprehension, a mortal whose skill and precision challenged even the might of Space Marines, altering the flow of battle in ways that could only be described as extraordinary. The corridors of the hive city twisted and constricted like the innards of some massive, decaying beast, forcing John Wick to move with a predator's caution. The distant echo of bolter fire and clashing armor faded behind him as he pressed further into the underbelly, where the air was thick with damp and rot, and the walls seemed almost to close in under the weight of centuries of neglect. It was here, in the narrow and shadowed passageways, that Wick first sensed the presence of the Gene Stealers, alien predators whose reputation was whispered among the most battle-hardened mercenaries as beings of impossible speed, lethal precision, and utterly alien cunning. Their movements were subtle at first, a flicker in the corner of his vision, a faint rustle of claws against metal, almost drowned out by the dripping water and distant groans of the hive. Wick slowed his pace, his senses sharpening to their maximum. He understood that this fight would not be conventional. These were creatures designed for ambush, stalking their prey with a savagery beyond comprehension. His training, instincts, and experience with human and superhuman opponents informed him, yet the sheer otherness of the Gene Stealers demanded a level of adaptability he had rarely been forced to employ. Every shadow became a potential threat, every sound a signal of danger, every flicker of movement a possible strike. Ahead, a dim light reflected off glistening carapace, illuminating the pale, almost translucent skin of a Gene Stealer crouched low on a catwalk above the main corridor. Its multi-jointed limbs coiled like springs, its claws curved like sickles, poised to strike with unimaginable speed. Wick's eyes narrowed, calculating distance, angle, and timing. He could not rely on conventional tactics alone. The creatures were too fast, too unpredictable. He had to anticipate their strikes, force them into disadvantageous positions, and exploit every environmental feature to survive. The first Gene Stealer lunged, a blur of motion that should have been impossible. Wick rolled to the side, feeling the rush of air as claws shredded concrete mere inches from his face. He drew a pair of pistols and fired in precise bursts, aiming not merely to wound, but to destabilize, to disrupt the creature's attack rhythm. One of the bullets struck its shoulder joint, sending it crashing against the railing, but it recovered almost immediately, spinning in a fluid, alien grace that defied human comprehension. Wick recognized the threat. Hesitation meant death. Overextension meant death. And yet reckless aggression was equally fatal. He needed control, balance, and absolute precision. The corridor erupted into a deadly ballet of motion. Gen Stealers came from all sides, leaping from scaffolds, scaling walls, and dropping from overhead catwalks. Wick's body moved in perfect harmony with his surroundings. He vaulted over rubble, rolled under swinging claws, and fired with uncanny accuracy, using every piece of debris as cover, every shadow as an advantage. Sparks flew as bullets tore through alien flesh, and scuttling metal claws shattered stone and pipe alike. The creatures were relentless, driven by instinct and unyielding hunger. Yet Wick's control, composure, and experience allowed him to respond to each assault with equal ferocity and precision. He adapted his movements in real time, turning the architecture of the hive against the Genestealers. A series of loose girders became a trap. He lured one creature into a corner and triggered a collapse, pinning it under twisted metal. Another, faster and more cunning, tried to flank him through a side passage, only to be met with a well-aimed shot that struck the skull with near impossible accuracy, exploiting a slight rotational flaw in its armored carapace. Wick's understanding of physics, timing, and human ingenuity became his greatest weapons against creatures engineered for pure predation. The Genestealers' attacks were coordinated, though not in a way familiar to human strategy. It was a terrifying, alien intelligence, each move feeding into the next, forcing Wick to continually adjust and rethink tactics on the fly. He dodged, countered, and repositioned constantly, turning his environment into a maze of lethal advantage. Water pipes, exposed electrical conduits, and hanging debris became tools to slow, injure, or incapacitate the creatures. He moved like a shadow, unpredictable, yet deadly, an anomaly in a world designed for creatures far beyond human capability. Despite the ferocity and speed of his adversaries, Wick's mind remained clear, focused on efficiency and survival. He anticipated leaps, calculated landing zones, and used the creature's own momentum against them. When a Genestealer attempted to strike from above, he sidestepped and triggered a dangling chain of debris, sending it crashing down onto another. A cascade of destruction, executed with flawless timing. The creature's instinctual intelligence allowed them to recover quickly, but each disruption bought Wick critical seconds. Seconds in which his lethal precision could tip the balance. In the narrowest part of the corridor, surrounded by shadows and alien shapes, Wick became the embodiment of human adaptability and lethal skill. The Genestealers, creatures bred for death and ambush, met a predator who was not only fast and precise, but unpredictable, calculating, and utterly relentless. His body flowed from attack to attack, evading, countering, and striking with a rhythm that seemed almost supernatural. A perfect synthesis of instinct, experience, and human ingenuity. As the fight escalated, Wick began to recognize patterns in the creature's behavior, exploiting their instinctual tendencies while maintaining control over his own movements. The environment, hostile and decaying, became his ally. Pipes shattered, sparks flew, concrete cracked under well-timed impacts, and the Genestealers' own speed and aggression became their undoing when leveraged against the calculated precision of a mortal mind trained to kill with efficiency beyond imagination. Wick moved like a shadow through the chaos, unseen until lethal strikes revealed his presence. A human predator, standing defiant against the alien horror that hunted him. The subtle hum of energy and distant clangs of machinery gave way to an oppressive silence as John Wick pressed further into the hive city. The once crowded corridors were now emptied by fleeing cultists and the relentless predators he had already faced. Yet a new presence made itself felt, a weight heavier than any he had yet encountered, a scrutiny that prickled the skin and tugged at the edges of perception. Wick sensed it before he saw it. The invisible gaze of the Inquisition, those agents of judgment who dealt in suspicion and death, whose very presence could warp the behavior of men and machines alike. The air itself seemed charged, thick with an expectation of revelation and the kind of scrutiny that could dissect motive and action with unerring accuracy. Wick moved cautiously, yet deliberately, a predator in unfamiliar terrain, aware that he was now a subject of interest, not merely an intruder. From the shadows, figures emerged, humans garbed in austere black robes, reinforced with light armor, their faces concealed beneath hoods, augmented lenses glinting with a faint red glow. Each carried a weapon or device designed for precision, observation, or control. Their movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, yet underpinned with lethal intent. Wick's eyes scanned each of them, noting posture, probable training, and threat potential. There was no room for hesitation here. The Inquisition did not make mistakes often, and those they targeted rarely survived their judgment. One agent stepped forward, raising a gloved hand, the intricate symbols on the gauntlets catching what little light remained. "Identify yourself, outsider," the voice demanded, filtered and modulated through subtle vox augmentation. "Your presence has been noted across multiple sectors. You bear skill, lethal intent, and a history that precedes comprehension. Speak now, or be taken for assessment." Wick did not flinch. His response was measured, his tone calm, betraying no hint of fear, only recognition of the stakes. He allowed his body to relax, while every muscle remained coiled, ready for any outcome. The Inquisitors moved closer, their formation tight and precise, a circle of judgment that narrowed around him. Wick noted their spacing, the angles of potential attacks, and the subtle signals used for silent communication. This was not a battle to be fought solely with bullets or blades. It was psychological, tactical, and deadly. Every choice would carry weight. Every movement could tip the balance towards survival or immediate execution. Wick's mind cataloged possibilities, analyzing weaknesses and anticipating decisions. The Inquisition was patient and calculating, but they were not infallible. He intended to exploit any hesitation, any trace of arrogance or assumption, to survive. The first attempt came without warning. A subtle pulse of psychic energy, restrained yet probing, washed over Wick, probing defenses and seeking vulnerability. He instinctively rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the brunt of the psychic scan. His own mental discipline, honed through years of focus and survival against human adversaries, kept him anchored. He understood quickly that these agents were not only physically capable, but trained in detecting anomalies, in parsing intent and resilience with tools and psychic aids. Wick countered with calculated movement, using shadows and debris as cover while maintaining situational awareness. One Inquisitor activated a weapon, a complex combination of projectile and energy discharge, calibrated to incapacitate or extract compliance. Wick reacted instantly, firing with lethal precision, targeting non-lethal points where possible to disrupt rather than kill outright, understanding that any aggressive action would escalate the situation. Sparks erupted as his shots struck reinforced surfaces, forcing the Inquisitors to adjust and reposition. He flowed through the corridor with uncanny rhythm, evading and countering simultaneously, using the narrow environment to force their movements into predictable patterns that he could exploit. The tension in the corridor became almost tangible. The Inquisitors recognized Wick's skill, noting that this mortal did not behave like a normal human. His reflexes, adaptability, and precision forced them to recalibrate their approach. He was not merely a subject to be observed or controlled. He was an active participant in the engagement, an anomaly whose existence challenged their assumptions. Wick pressed the advantage, creating chaos where they expected order, striking swiftly at angles they could not predict, and disappearing into shadows before they could respond fully. The air filled with a chorus of clashing metal, suppressed energy discharges, and whispered commands. Wick moved fluidly, exploiting the environmental hazards of the hive city, the fractured piping, dangling cables, and precarious debris. Every step was deliberate, every action designed to exploit both the physical space and the predictable tendencies of his observers. A sudden crash, as a support beam gave way, forced the Inquisitors to redirect their formation, and Wick used the opportunity to maneuver behind cover, analyzing the reactions of each agent with methodical precision. Even as he engaged, Wick's mind processed the broader implications. These were not mere humans. They were instruments of judgment, skilled, ruthless, and extraordinarily resourceful. Any sustained engagement would be costly. Survival required a combination of ingenuity, adaptability, and an understanding of their operational psychology. He noted patterns, the subtle shifts in stance, micro-movements in the hands, variations in breathing under stress. Each observation allowed him to predict and manipulate their next moves, turning observation into a weapon. Despite their formidable abilities, Wick remained composed. He moved with the calm efficiency of a hunter accustomed to facing overwhelming odds, using unpredictability as his shield. The Inquisition's interest in him was a double-edged sword. They were simultaneously a threat and a potential ally if leveraged correctly, a paradox he understood and exploited instinctively. With each calculated step, each precise strike and evasive maneuver, he maintained control of the battlefield, dictating the tempo and forcing his observers to react. Their intent analyzed and countered in real time. The corridor, littered with debris and illuminated by flickering lights, became a theater of precision, strategy, and human adaptability. Wick's movements were a perfect synthesis of instinct, experience, and lethal creativity, challenging the assumptions of the Inquisition while preserving his own agency. He was a mortal whose skill and focus rendered him both a curiosity and a threat, navigating the deadly scrutiny with the same cold efficiency that had defined his life as a hunter and survivor. The air of the Hive City grew heavier as John Wick moved deeper into the ruins. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, signaling a presence far more insidious than the cultists, gen-stealers, or even the Inquisition agents he had encountered. There was a hum that seemed to resonate through the stone and metal, almost imperceptible at first, like a vibration in the marrow of the city itself. Wick's instincts flared. He had faced the impossible many times, but this was different. It was not a flesh and blood adversary, nor a machine constrained by protocol. The presence he sensed was alien, metaphysical, and driven by a hunger that sought not merely to kill, but to consume and corrupt. Chaos daemons. From the shadows, a flicker of distorted light coalesced into form. The first daemon was smaller, almost humanoid in shape, yet its body shimmered with a malevolent energy, skin writhing and shifting as though it had no fixed dimension. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, penetrating deep into Wick's mind, seeking cracks in his will, probing for weaknesses. Wick's pulse remained steady, his breath measured. He had faced death countless times, had stared into the abyss of humanity's darkest corners, and yet this was a threat unlike any other. The daemons sought not to overpower him physically. They sought to inhabit his mind, to bend his will, to twist him into a weapon for their chaotic purposes. Wick shifted his stance, maintaining a low profile and moving fluidly, aware that any sudden aggression might provoke a psychic backlash. He studied the daemon, noting the rhythm of its movements, the way the aura around it pulsed with intent. Its form flickered and shifted, attempting to create uncertainty, to destabilize his perception. But Wick's focus was unbreakable. He had trained his mind and body to operate in synchrony under extreme pressure, and this would not be the first time his resilience was tested against an enemy that relied on fear and manipulation rather than sheer strength. A surge of energy washed over him, a psychic tendril probing for vulnerabilities in thought and memory. Wick felt the pull, a strange tug at his consciousness, subtle at first, then insistent, as if the daemon sought to draw him into a place he did not wish to go. He resisted, anchoring himself in reality, relying on muscle memory, instinct, and mental discipline honed through years of survival and combat. His eyes narrowed, and he adjusted his movements, blending physical evasiveness with mental fortitude. The daemon lunged, claws or energy tendrils flashing, attempting both physical and psychic assaults simultaneously. Wick's reflexes were flawless, ducking and rolling, striking when openings appeared, never giving the daemon a moment to establish dominance. The surrounding environment became part of the battle. Broken machinery, exposed conduits, and fractured concrete offered cover and opportunity. Wick utilized each element with precision, creating barriers, redirecting energy flows, and exploiting the unstable architecture to gain even fleeting advantages against entities that could phase in and out of perception. One daemon attempted a direct psychic strike, attempting to implant visions of despair and submission. Wick felt the intrusions in his mind, but he forced focus, compartmentalizing the sensation and responding with calculated physical strikes. He had always believed that mental clarity was as much a weapon as any firearm or blade. And here, it became essential to survival. A larger daemon emerged from the shadows, its form more monstrous and commanding, twisting and coiling with chaotic energy. Its presence alone made the air shimmer, distorting perception and forcing Wick to rely on instincts rather than sight alone. It struck with a speed and force that was almost imperceptible, yet Wick evaded, his movements fluid, blending rolling, diving, and precise counterattacks. Every strike he delivered was measured, not merely to injure, but to destabilize, to force the daemon into reactive patterns that he could predict and exploit. Despite their otherworldly powers, the demon's actions were not entirely unpredictable. Wick studied their rhythm, noting how they exploited environmental chaos to their advantage, and he mirrored that strategy, turning every shadow, every flickering light, and every narrow passage into an extension of his tactical mind. Sparks flew as energy and clawed assaults collided with metal and concrete, debris cascading around them in a symphony of destruction that Wick navigated with unmatched precision. The psychic pressure intensified, a constant push against the boundaries of his consciousness. Wick's mind anchored itself to memories of survival, of discipline, of relentless focus under impossible conditions. He felt the daemons probing, testing, seeking cracks in his humanity to exploit. Yet his resolve held firm. Each intrusion was met with mental resistance, a counterbalance of intent that kept him tethered to reality. He understood that their power was significant, that the slightest lapse in focus could result in possession or corruption. But his training, discipline, and sheer force of will made him more than capable of resisting. As the daemons adjusted tactics, Wick adapted in turn. He combined movement, environment, and timing, striking precisely at weak points, whether physical or metaphysical, without overextending or leaving himself vulnerable. Each maneuver was deliberate, executed with the confidence of a mind and body synchronized to a single purpose: survival against impossible odds. The battle was not merely physical. It was mental, spiritual, and tactical. An engagement where every decision, every perception, and every reflex was tested to the extreme. Even as the daemons continued their relentless assault, Wick maintained a level of composure that unsettled them. They were used to fear, to prey bending under the weight of corruption. Yet here was a mortal who resisted utterly, adapting, countering, and surviving with an efficiency that defied their expectations. He moved through the ruined corridors like a shadow imbued with lethal purpose. His presence, a challenge to their chaotic authority, a testament to the power of human will and discipline. The Hive City gave way to open stretches of industrial ruin as John Wick moved forward, his senses razor-sharp, every step calculated. Smoke and dust hung in the air, thick enough to blur shapes and distort sound. Yet his eyes cut through the haze, trained to detect the slightest motion. He had learned long ago that environments like this were as much a weapon as any blade or firearm. Every pillar, every shattered wall, every piece of hanging scaffolding could be used to control the battlefield, to dictate the flow of combat. Wick moved like a shadow through the ruined streets, alert to the distant echo of footsteps and the hum of machinery that hinted at forces still moving within the wreckage. Ahead, the outline of a fortress world came into view, perched atop jagged cliffs and surrounded by rings of scorched land. Its walls were massive, reinforced with layers of ceramite and spiked iron, covered in the sigils and banners of a tyrannical warlord whose reputation was whispered even in the lower sectors of the Hive. Wick paused to assess. This was no ordinary stronghold, no simple encampment. The defenses were layered, overlapping, designed to repel sieges and crush any intruders. Patrols moved along ramparts and streets with mechanical precision. Heavily armed soldiers scanning the perimeter, augmented with sensors and armor that enhanced strength, speed, and lethality. Wick's mind cataloged each point of potential vulnerability, each path he might exploit, understanding that a direct assault would be suicide, but infiltration and improvisation could turn the odds in his favor. He approached the perimeter cautiously, utilizing shadows, debris, and ruined buildings to mask his approach. The patrols moved with predictable routines, though their training and discipline were formidable. Wick observed patterns, how guards shifted at intervals, how their augmented sensors scanned, the predictable pauses in vigilance that could be exploited. He adjusted his movements, timing every step and roll, using the ruined environment to break line of sight, slipping closer to the fortress under the cover of debris and darkness. Each step brought him closer to the stronghold, closer to the inevitable confrontation with those who ruled it. Within the fortress, Wick noted the presence of fortified towers, choke points, and strategic kill zones. He understood the importance of controlling the environment, of forcing his enemies to fight on terrain that favored him. Even if only partially, he moved silently, disabling sensors, neutralizing lone guards with precision strikes, and using improvised distractions to mask his passage. Every engagement was brief, efficient, and calculated, leaving no trace beyond the incapacitated or disoriented personnel. Wick's movements were a dance of deadly intent, fluid, precise, and entirely deliberate, adapting to the fortress's defenses while maintaining his own advantage. As he infiltrated deeper, he encountered heavily armed squads, moving in patrols and response teams designed to engage intruders with overwhelming force. Wick studied their formations, their spacing, and the rhythm of their maneuvers. He used vertical space, climbing scaffolds and scaling walls to flank or bypass threats, exploiting angles that left the defenders unable to bring their superior firepower to bear effectively. The fortress itself became an ally, offering ambush points, cover, and avenues for improvisation. Every movement he made was informed by the architecture, the routines of the defenders, and his own lethal intuition. One heavily armed unit attempted to corner him in a narrow hallway. Wick assessed the choke point instantly and noticed a series of hanging cables and exposed piping. With precise timing, he triggered a cascade of sparks and swinging debris, creating a momentary barrier and disorienting the attackers. Using the distraction, he dispatched one guard with a rapid, calculated strike, and another with a thrown improvised projectile, leveraging the environment to amplify his lethality. Even against numerically superior opponents, Wick's adaptability, precision, and tactical intelligence turned each encounter into a test of his predator instincts. He moved through the fortress like a phantom, leaving no evidence of his passage other than incapacitated soldiers and disarrayed defenses. The tyrannical warlord's domain, designed to intimidate and dominate, became a playground for Wick's lethal ingenuity. Each corridor, stairwell, and chamber was navigated with meticulous attention to detail, balancing aggression with stealth, always aware of the potential for overwhelming resistance. He analyzed every aspect of the environment, anticipating patrol rotations, sensor sweeps, and even the psychological state of the defenders, exploiting human tendencies against their mechanical precision. In larger chambers, where groups of soldiers gathered, Wick employed a combination of misdirection and timing, striking with pinpoint accuracy to create confusion and fear. Explosions and noise were used sparingly, carefully orchestrated, to manipulate enemy perception and draw them into positions advantageous to him. He moved quickly, fluidly, ensuring that no single engagement lasted longer than necessary, always prioritizing survival and the disruption of command structures. The fortress, despite its formidable defenses, began to unravel in the wake of his methodical incursions, each action leaving a ripple of chaos and uncertainty. As Wick pressed further into the heart of the stronghold, he encountered the warlord's personal guard, augmented, heavily armed, and fanatically loyal. Each opponent represented a pinnacle of combat capability, yet Wick's movements were deliberate, exploiting slight misalignments, environmental hazards, and the natural rhythm of human motion to neutralize threats efficiently. He adapted his iconic style to the technology and armor of this world, finding openings where brute force alone could not penetrate. His lethal efficiency, combined with his instinctual understanding of combat, allowed him to overcome even the most formidable defenses. John Wick moved deeper into the heart of the fortress world, each step deliberate and precise, his awareness extending beyond mere survival into a calculation of every possible variable. The familiar weight of his weapons, adapted and modified to interface with the technology of this universe, grounded him. His pistols had been tuned to fire enhanced munitions capable of piercing power armor, while his knives and improvised melee weapons had been reinforced with ceramite-edged blades and energized coatings capable of cutting through both flesh and alloy. He handled them as extensions of himself, each movement fluid, natural, honed by decades of repetition and lethal experience. The unfamiliarity of the alien world and its technology did not faze him. It challenged him to adapt, and adaptation was his greatest weapon. The corridors twisted and narrowed as he progressed, forcing him to rethink conventional tactics and rely on improvisation. Wick used his environment strategically, climbing scaffolds, vaulting over debris, and manipulating unstable structures to create traps. A railing he had loosened earlier became a swing point to knock a heavily armored guard off balance. Hanging cables were cut to collapse upon a patrol as he rolled into a shadowed alcove. Every element of the fortress that had once seemed threatening now worked in his favor, as he turned architecture into an extension of his lethal skill set. Patrols of heavily armed soldiers moved with rigid coordination, but Wick's movements were designed to disrupt that rhythm. He observed their formations, predicting when and where they would turn, when their attention would shift, and exploited those fractions of a second with precision strikes. A squad of 4 advanced toward a corridor intersection, unaware of the wires Wick had strung between 2 pillars, connected to an exposed power conduit. A well-placed shot from one of his pistols ignited a shower of sparks, electrocuting one soldier, while the others instinctively drew back, opening themselves to further neutralization. Every attack was efficient, controlled, calculated to maximize effect. And as he progressed, Wick adapted not only his weapons, but his fighting style to the alien technology and armor he faced. Bolter rounds and chain weapons demanded altered approaches. He avoided predictable paths and high visibility angles, relying on rapid repositioning, feints, and vertical movement to outmaneuver enemies with superior firepower. His pistols were now tools for distraction and precision, each shot intended to disrupt, disable, or channel the enemy into disadvantageous positions. Close combat became an exercise in leverage and timing, using opponents' own strength and armor weight against them. The larger chambers posed different challenges. Groups of soldiers, augmented and disciplined, attempted to box him in. Wick's eyes constantly scanned, calculating trajectory, timing, and environmental variables. A ceiling conduit hummed with energy overhead. He fired a shot, sparking an arc that forced soldiers to react defensively, and used the confusion to vault over a railing, landing among them with controlled aggression. His strikes were fast, precise, targeting weak points in armor and body, taking advantage of human vulnerability within the mechanical enhancements. Every movement was designed to destabilize, confuse, and dominate, turning the battlefield into a choreography of controlled violence. Even when facing automated defenses, Wick's mind processed each threat instantly. Turrets and automated sentries required him to time dashes between cover, anticipate sensor sweeps, and disable systems using a combination of improvised tools and keen observation. A vent shaft provided vertical access to a walkway. From above, he manipulated an electrical panel to temporarily disable a sentry turret, then dropped silently into the midst of patrolling soldiers, striking with a lethal combination of his knife and pistols. Every action demonstrated an adaptability that defied conventional combat logic, blending intuition, environmental awareness, and brutal efficiency. Psychological control was as important as physical dominance. Wick moved silently, appearing and disappearing unpredictably, forcing the fortress's defenders to react constantly to uncertainty. Shadows became allies. Echoes and distant noises were tools to manipulate perception. He ensured that his presence alone introduced doubt and hesitation into enemy calculations. Soldiers who might have relied on training and mechanical precision found themselves anticipating threats that never materialized and reacting too late when Wick struck with deadly accuracy. The adaptation extended beyond weapons and tactics into mindset. Wick approached every scenario with a combination of anticipation and improvisation. Where human reflexes failed, instinct guided him. Where technology threatened, analysis and experimentation prevailed. Every confrontation with armored troops, every encounter with automated defenses, was transformed into an opportunity to learn and exploit. The fortress world, designed to crush intruders, became instead a proving ground where human ingenuity and lethal precision triumphed over brute strength and overwhelming numbers. Wick moved through corridors, stairwells, and open chambers like a force reshaping the battlefield with every step. He anticipated every patrol, exploited every flaw, and converted obstacles into weapons, even against foes with armor and augmentation superior to his own biology. He adapted his methods, combining timing, precision, and calculated aggression to remain dominant. Each action left the defenders in disarray, their coordinated formations fractured, their confidence undermined. The fortress's reputation as impregnable began to unravel in his wake. As Wick advanced, it became clear that his adaptation was not just about survival, it was mastery. He transformed alien weapons and armor, unpredictable terrain, and disciplined foes into extensions of his lethal efficiency. Every step, every strike, every calculated move demonstrated that he was not merely a mortal in an alien universe, but a predator capable of bending circumstance, environment, and enemy skill to his will. Imposing human ingenuity and deadly precision upon a world designed to resist intrusion. John Wick advanced cautiously through the outer ramparts of the fortress. The city sprawled beneath him in jagged, ruined layers of metal and concrete. Smoke rose from distant fires, drifting in the polluted air. The scent of ozone and burning machinery clinging to everything. From this vantage point, Wick could see the full scale of the conflict that had engulfed the sector. Patrols moving in disciplined formations, only shadows melting into darkness. Gunfire sparking intermittently across streets and alleys, and the occasional silhouette of larger armored figures wielding devastating weapons. The battlefield was chaotic, yet ordered in the way only trained soldiers and disciplined forces could impose. Wick's mind cataloged every movement, every pattern, every potential hazard and opportunity with surgical precision. He began to move along the fractured parapets, utilizing the cover provided by ruined battlements and collapsed machinery. Every step was measured, calculated to avoid exposure, while providing maximum observational advantage. His eyes scanned for movement, the faintest deviation in shadows, the glint of a metallic surface that might indicate a weapon or a sensor. Every detail mattered. Wick understood that in a war zone such as this, one misstep could mean death, and the enemies he faced were capable of responding with overwhelming force in an instant. Yet the chaos worked in his favor, creating distractions, opportunities, and a rhythm he could exploit to maneuver unseen. A squad of heavily armored soldiers moved along the streets below, their bolters scanning the perimeter. Wick analyzed their patrol path, noting pauses, overlaps in their fields of fire, and moments when their attention was divided. Using a narrow ledge and a series of debris piles, he descended silently, moving like a shadow, undetected. He approached a narrow alley where another patrol was closing in, understanding that brute force was not an option here. Timing and precision would dictate the outcome. Wick waited, observing, calculating the exact moment when the squad would be most vulnerable, then struck with lethal accuracy, neutralizing the nearest soldier before the others could react, exploiting the confusion to disappear again into the maze of ruined streets. The fortress's inner defenses were even more formidable. Automated sentries rotated along the walls, energy fields shimmered over access points, and the patrols were reinforced by augmented soldiers capable of near-superhuman reaction times. Wick adapted continuously, combining his environment, movement, and modified weaponry to stay one step ahead. He climbed a partially collapsed scaffold to gain a vertical advantage, using a hanging cable to swing across an open courtyard. Sparks flew from his improvised trap, knocking a sentry turret offline temporarily, while he landed silently behind the remaining defenders. His strikes were quick, precise, exploiting gaps in armor and the limited situational awareness of those who were trained to fight predictably. In larger chambers, Wick faced multiple opponents simultaneously. He understood that direct confrontation required controlled aggression. He timed each shot, each movement, and each strike to create openings, manipulate the battlefield, and maintain control over the engagement. Debris became cover and weapon. Columns became obstacles to funnel opponents into disadvantageous positions, and environmental hazards were triggered to disorient and divide enemy forces. Wick moved like water, flowing around resistance, exploiting patterns, and striking with lethal precision wherever vulnerability presented itself. He encountered mechanized units, servitors, and drones designed to patrol and enforce the fortress's defenses. Their speed and strength exceeded human capability, yet Wick adapted instantaneously. He used misdirection, careful timing, and environmental manipulation to disrupt their coordinated attacks. A collapsed gantry created a temporary barrier between him and a charging servitor, giving him the fraction of a second needed to disable a critical joint with a precise shot. Each encounter was a test of adaptability, combining instincts honed through human combat experience with rapid analysis of alien technology and patterns. Wick's movement through the fortress became a study in psychological warfare. His presence was ghostly and unpredictable, forcing enemy squads to anticipate threats that were never where expected. The defenders' discipline began to crack under the pressure of unseen attacks, flashes of gunfire, and sudden environmental collapses that disrupted formations. Wick's mastery of timing, improvisation, and precise lethality allowed him to dictate the pace of engagement, compelling enemies to react rather than act. His understanding of combat extended beyond individual skirmishes to controlling the flow of battle itself. The city's verticality offered both peril and opportunity. Wick moved across rooftops, scaling fractured walls, and navigating precarious ledges to flank heavily fortified positions. From above, he could manipulate defenses, drop debris strategically, and exploit blind spots in patrol routes. A squad attempting to secure a choke point was forced into disarray when Wick triggered a hanging metal beam to swing into their path, causing confusion and creating lethal openings. He struck quickly, neutralizing threats before the defenders could coordinate effectively. Wick adapted continuously, recognizing the limitations of his enemies and exploiting them. Automated defenses required timing and observation, while human and augmented forces demanded precision and prediction. He alternated between stealth and aggression, keeping opponents off balance, never allowing them to regain full control. His movements were a combination of instinct, strategy, and adaptation, turning environmental hazards, patrol patterns, and tactical timing into extensions of his own lethal capability. Even as the scale of the conflict grew larger, with reinforcements arriving and automated defenses recalibrating, Wick remained a master of adaptation. He observed, analyzed, and exploited every variable in real time. Each step, each calculated strike, and each manipulation of the environment reinforced his dominance in the battlefield. He had become not merely a mortal in a fortress of war, but a force capable of reshaping the flow of combat, turning the tide through precision, ingenuity, and an unparalleled understanding of strategy, timing, and human and alien weaknesses. The fortress had begun to feel less like a stronghold and more like a labyrinth of opportunity and danger as John Wick pressed further. Every step deliberate, every movement calculated. Smoke and ash from distant fires drifted across the battlements, carrying the acrid scent of molten metal and charred stone. Wick's senses were at their peak, each sound, each flicker of motion, only shadows melting into darkness. Each subtle vibration in the ground contributing to a mental map that allowed him to anticipate threats before they fully manifested. He understood that in this universe, conventional rules did not apply. Weapons were larger, faster, and deadlier. Armor was more resilient, and the enemies he faced were trained beyond human limits, or were twisted by alien and chaotic forces. Yet his experience, precision, and instincts allowed him to adapt. Moving through a collapsed courtyard, Wick spotted the remnants of an elite unit. Soldiers augmented with cybernetic enhancements and lethal precision. Their patrol formation was disciplined, Their weaponry advanced, firing with speeds and accuracy that surpassed any human expectation. Wick analyzed their behavior with a predator's focus, noting the cadence of their movement, the rhythm of their scanning, and the gaps that emerged in their coordination. He leveraged the ruined environment, slipping silently between shadows, using debris, broken walls, and exposed conduits to mask his approach and to create opportunities for sudden strikes. He came across a squad guarding a heavily reinforced entrance. Each soldier was a formidable adversary, equipped with power armor and advanced ranged weapons. Wick understood that direct confrontation would be costly. Instead, he used precision, timing, and environmental advantage. A piece of dangling scaffolding became an improvised trap. He loosened a series of cables connected to an exposed power conduit, creating a sudden arc of electricity that forced the soldiers to momentarily retreat and stagger. In that fleeting moment, he struck, targeting weak points with unerring accuracy, disabling or incapacitating without expending unnecessary ammunition. His movements were fluid, deliberate, a blend of calculated aggression and stealth that made him unpredictable. The fortress was filled with technological hazards, automated turrets, energy barriers, and security drones. Wick adapted instantly, observing patterns, exploiting mechanical blind spots, and using environmental manipulation to neutralize threats. A hovering drone attempted to scan his position. Wick rolled behind cover, using a ruptured power panel to overload its sensors and cause a temporary shutdown. He then moved silently to flank the nearest patrol, striking with lethal precision before they could react. Every engagement was swift, efficient, and adapted to the nature of the adversary. Verticality became a critical factor in Wick's strategy. He scaled walls, climbed scaffolds, and used the height of partially collapsed buildings to gain vantage points, both for observation and for tactical advantage. From above, he could disrupt patrol formations, drop debris strategically, or fire upon enemies from angles they could not anticipate. A reinforced guard tower posed a significant threat, but Wick identified a weak structural point. He manipulated the environment to collapse part of the wall, disorienting the occupants and creating a path for him to engage effectively. His ability to combine environmental awareness with combat skill amplified his lethality beyond conventional expectations. Wick's adaptability extended to understanding and exploiting the psychology of his enemies. Soldiers conditioned for discipline and adherence to protocol were forced to react to an unpredictable variable. His presence was ghostly, a constant uncertainty that disrupted their formation and forced hesitation. Each feint, each sudden appearance, and each silent strike amplified fear and confusion, magnifying the effectiveness of his actions. He used unpredictability as a tool, shaping the battlefield by controlling perception as much as physical reality. In the inner chambers of the fortress, Wick confronted groups of enemies, coordinated to respond to intruders. He moved between them with fluid precision, blending stealth with bursts of controlled aggression. Environmental hazards, dangling machinery, unstable walkways, exposed conduits became tools in his hands. He manipulated these features to divide enemy formations, creating openings that he exploited with lethal timing. The fortress, designed to be a place of domination and control, became a dynamic landscape of opportunity where his skill, strategy, and adaptability dictated the flow of conflict. Even when faced with enemies augmented with cybernetics or bio-enhancements, Wick adjusted seamlessly. A soldier with enhanced reflexes attempted to close distance rapidly. Wick sidestepped, using momentum to propel himself behind cover, and fired precise shots at weak points revealed in the armor's joint. He used every advantage: timing, positioning, environmental hazards, and psychological pressure to maintain control of the engagement, neutralizing threats with efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. Every movement in the fortress was part of a larger strategy. Wick was aware of multiple layers of threats, the potential arrival of reinforcements, and the complex terrain that could be both a danger and a tool. He continuously adapted, exploiting patterns, creating unpredictability, and leveraging both environment and enemy behavior to his advantage. His precision, tactical intelligence, and mastery of improvisation allowed him to overcome the odds repeatedly, making the impossible seem achievable. As Wick moved closer to the heart of the fortress, it became clear that his combination of human ingenuity, lethal skill, and adaptability made him more than an intruder. He was a force capable of turning a stronghold built for defense and domination into a landscape of controlled chaos, where every step, every action, and every decision reshaped the battlefield. His mastery of adaptation, combat, and strategy elevated him from mortal operative to apex predator, navigating the fortress with a skill and efficiency that challenged both technology and training, forcing all who opposed him to react to his movements and leaving an